Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments from which city you are looking. When I close my eyes, the classroom comes back to me in the old colors, chalk dust floating like winter breath, the varnished desks scarred with initials and hearts, the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. I can smell the bitter ink of the school pens and the citrusy floor cleaner the janitor used in the mornings. I am an old woman now, and my hands tremble when I button my cardigan. But my memories of that room do not shake. They stand in a patient row, as though waiting for attendance. I suppose I am calling it now. Present, present, present. The cruel girls, the staring clock, the throat that couldn't find a voice. I was not born timid. Before school hardened me, I had a laugh like a creek rushing over stones, loud, unhindered. My grandmother used to say I came into the world with a shout. I imagine I did. But the first months of secondary school pulled the shout out of me thread by thread. It was a small school, the kind that smells of damp coats and books passed down through generations, where everyone thinks they know everyone's kin and business. My father had left, my mother worked nights at the bakery, and I took my place in that classroom with a sweater too thin and a satchel so carefully packed, as though carefulness could be a shield. There were 4 girls who mattered. You know their type. Wherever you live or lived, they walked in a pack, as if they shared one body and many eyes. When they turned toward you, their look was not a glance, but a verdict. They had names that sounded like pretty coins bright, ringing things, but I will not give them to you. The names do not matter, though at 14 they felt sacred, as though their syllables could grant or revoke citizenship in the only nation I knew, that classroom. If this were a story built for comfort, I would tell you that they chose me because I was different and that I learned to love that difference. But the truth is uglier and more ordinary. They chose me because they could. Because the teacher who loved grammar more than children looked at her notebook when the whispers began. Because I was quiet, and in the economy of cruelty, quiet is cheap. At first, the meanness was as soft as mist. I would arrive to find my chair pulled just out of place so that I sat a little too far from my desk and had to scoot, the rubber feet shrieking. My hair ribbon slipped away in the cloakroom, but I told myself I'd forgotten it. A note folded with such intricate care that it could have been a crane was passed to me and, when opened, revealed nothing but a crabbed drawing of a mouth with no tongue, and underneath, in a neat little hand, "Hush." The first time I cried was on the back stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors, where the plaster bore the thumbprints of the decades. It was winter. The banister was cold. I cried carefully, controlling the sound, learning to grieve like a thief who doesn't want to be caught. I did not go to a teacher. I did not go to my mother. She had enough to carry. Instead, I put my tears back like coins and returned to class with dry cheeks. And that, of course, was when the real work began. Once the pack scented that their claws had found my skin, they dug in. They were inventive. In a small place, creativity has only so many outlets, and they poured theirs into the art of making me small. My essays, when returned to me, sometimes bore extra margin notes in a pencil. Try sounding less desperate. Who writes such a thing? Girls who have decided that their power is a balloon and must be fed with the air from other people's lungs. In the cafeteria, a carton of milk, tipped just so that it gushed only toward my lap. A whisper that traveled like ivy so that in a single lunch period, the whole table knew I had done something I had not. The boys? Some were kind in private, but nowhere in the world is the currency of quiet kindness as valuable as the spectacle of laughter. They chose laughter. I will not tell you, here in my old age, that I forgave easily. I did not. My forgiveness grew the way certain trees do, crooked along the cliff, clutching at the rock, stubborn. It took years. Before that, there was only survival and the invention of a self that could survive. I learned to braid my hair so tight that the wind could not take it apart. I learned to move as though my body were a narrow corridor with doors on either side, doors I could close at will. I learned, most of all, to walk away without appearing to walk away. The tiny step sideways, the practiced smile, the nod that says, I have not heard you even when your words are a lit match against my skin. I read. Reading was the first and best revenge. I read the dictionary, the grammar book, the novels stacked in the library like a forest waiting to be walked. In stories, the truth glowed, not neat, not simple, but bright enough to see by. I found women there who had suffered worse and who did not disintegrate. I found phrases stronger than the classroom tide. When the girls passed a note and snickered, I wrote a sentence so exacting it felt like a key turning in a locked door. I collected such keys. Some afternoons, in the mirror, I practiced saying my name as if it were not a question. I pressed my back to the cool wall and imagined myself like the old brick, weathered but standing. Little spells, little rituals. Was this childish? Perhaps. But no one had ever taught me how to build a spine, and I needed one. There was a day when I almost fought. In the yard, under the sky that always seemed too big for our small lives. One of the girls. She had a tidy braid and a mouth that tilted upward even when she was not smiling. Pinched the soft skin of my inner arm and said, "You don't belong." Something rose in me, all salt and wire. My fist, my hand that would later lift babies and quilts, and the once heavy cartons of my mother's groceries curled. There was a playground supervisor only 20 steps away, but 20 steps is the distance between one life and the next. I saw myself swing. I saw myself become the kind of girl they said I was. Hysterical, common, punchable. I did not swing. I took the hurt, the way I always had, into the back stairwell of my body, and I went home. You may be impatient, old woman. You promised revenge. I did, and I will keep my promise. But you cannot understand the shape of my revenge unless you understand the shape of the wound. It was not one cut, but many. I bled in pinpricks for years. I became an expert in tiny bandages. There was a teacher later who saw me. Not many adults in that place looked up from their own aching, but this one did. He put a book on my desk without comment, a collection of speeches by women who had stood on stages and said hard, beautiful things. He taught history like a map of decisions. Who chose what and what the choosing cost. When my voice shook as I read aloud, he did not rush me, but neither did he let me sit down. He taught me that trembling could coexist with speaking. To this day, when I pour tea and my hand trembles, I call it that teacher's gift. The tremble that did not win. There were other gifts. I grew. I got out. My mother took a better job at a hospital laundry, which meant we could afford a better sweater and boots with soles that kept out snow. I studied. There is a stubbornness in some children no cruelty can blunt, and mine, thank God, was not blunted. I was accepted to a university by the river, and the pack, by then, had turned on one another as packs do when their prey escapes. They found other girls with softer necks. They stayed. I left. Here, if it were a different kind of tale, the revenge would be as clean as the snap of a twig. I became famous or wealthy, returned with a car that made people stare, or wrote a book with names thinly veiled, made them all characters, and killed them on the page. But I am too old for that. My revenge was slow and ordinary. It involved no courtrooms, no viral videos, no sudden reckonings beside the apples at the market. Perhaps you will be disappointed. Perhaps you wanted blood. I will not give you blood. I will give you a ledger. Item 1. I learned to recognize girls like them when they were small and still soft, and I stood between them and the sharpening. For 38 years, I taught literature in a sleepy school that smelled of chalk and dust and teenage mornings. When a pack began to form, as it always does, like frost on windows, I broke it up. Not with fire and brimstone, but with assigned partners, group projects that forced the pack to see the kid on the edge, rules that made cruelty unprofitable. I took the sharpest girls aside and handed them student council petitions, drama auditions, lab roles, jobs where their hunger for order and attention could find better food. You are a leader, I told them again and again, as if by saying it I could reshape the hunger itself. Was this revenge? It felt like it. To turn the stream where it began. To put my palm against the future and push, gently, a different way. Item 2. I kept every note anyone ever passed me that was kind. I am not a hoarder, but I have a box that smells like old paper and violets, and in it, thank you for staying after class. I like the poem. You have pretty handwriting. Your laugh is nice. It's like birds. When loneliness took me by the shoulders and shook me, I went to the box and read. Then, when I had the power to do so, I wrote notes. To sloppy boys who thought they were invisible. To girls who wore eyeliner like armor. To the quiet ones who were not beautiful yet, not by the standards of magazines. I passed the notes like contraband. You read well today. Your idea about the willow tree was stunning. You are brave. Did it change everything? No. But I had learned how small and sharp the paper cut could be. I aimed for small and soft instead, 1,000 little bandages sent out into the world by my ink. Revenge, yes. The gentler twin. Item 3. I studied the pack, the way you study a weather system that once blew your roof off. I learned the isobars and the oddly warm currents and the tight red spirals. They were not monsters. They were children who felt watched, and the watching made them cruel. Some had mothers who shrank them with their eyes. Some had fathers who were storms. If you don't acknowledge this, you will never change anything. You will only fling stones and feel briefly righteous. So I learned to look with a different gaze, and I taught others to look that way too. I stood in front of teachers and parents in dull fluorescent rooms and told them stories about what happens when you say nothing. Only sometimes did they hear me. But sometimes is not nothing. It is a crack in the ice. Water finds cracks. Once, in the middle of my life, I saw one of the girls again. At a supermarket. I was buying tomatoes, and she was buying a bottle of cheap sparkling wine. Age had pressed her face flat. That is the best way I can describe it. The mouth that tilted upward had become simply tired. She recognized me. The way recognition passes over a face is like weather too. The sudden clearing or clouding, and in hers it was both. She retrieved her eyes from mine quickly, as if I were heat. She fumbled with the bottle in a way that suggested she had not expected her hands to betray her, that somewhere in her body she still felt entitled to grace. I did not slap her. I did not hiss. I did not create a scene. I stood very still and allowed her to feel the weight of that moment, which had no bells, no crowd. She opened her mouth and closed it. I thought, if she apologizes, I will accept. If she does not, I will leave and imagine lilies growing over her memory. She said, I was awful to you. In a breath so tiny, it could have been the life of a moth. I said, yes. I did not rescue her with a joke or a wave of the hand. I let the yes stand. It stood there between us like a little white pillar. She nodded. She said, I've been sick. and I understood that she was trying to buy something with that information. A sale on pity, perhaps. I said, "I hope you get better." It was true. I did. I left with my tomatoes. I breathed. The sky was very blue. I remember that distinctly. The old prayers say, "Vengeance is the Lord's." But I have found that sometimes vengeance looks like a woman, not letting another woman escape the word yes. You want a sharper blade. I can feel it. Even now, the internet is full of triumphant returns and edited clips of humiliation. It would be so easy to tell you that I outmaneuvered them all, that I mailed each of them a letter, listing the harm they'd done and included a bill. But I have held in my arms a child who cried because a girl said her coat was ugly. I have watched a boy sit alone under a basketball hoop that swayed with other boys' joy. I have seen the small deaths that happen in schools. There is no pure payback. There is only the slow turning of a wheel, and you can choose to bend it toward the mindless grinding or toward something quieter. A tire on a road headed somewhere else. You want something more immediate, though, and perhaps you deserve it. So here. In my final year of teaching, the school invited alumni to speak. A woman wrote in, offering to share her journey from queen bee to community leader. The title made me roll my eyes. It was one of them. I recognized the tilt in even the email's static voice. I had, of course, the right to accept or decline speakers. I told the committee we would accept her, but only if she agreed to sit on a panel built not around her redemption tale, but around listening to current students speak about the state of the school. She agreed. Perhaps she liked microphones too much to resist. She came. She wore a suit the color of late roses. She took the stage. She spoke first, as we had allowed her to, telling the compressed version of a life that had, she said, prioritized the wrong metrics. The crowd was polite. Then I called on a girl in the third row with a scar that ran like a comma near her ear. The girl spoke, not of the past, but of the present. She named the places the pack roam now, group chats, DMs, comment sections. She traced the paths cruelty now walks on screens that never sleep. She named names, not individuals, but tactics. I watched the woman's face as she heard them, an endless public confession. Her hands, folded on her lap, tightened. She turned to me and, voice pitched for me alone, said, "This is brutal." I replied, also for her alone, "Yes." The panel ended. The students got pie in the cafeteria and a break from homework for their brave work. The woman did not ask for my number. She did not linger. I do not know if she changed. That is the frustrating thing about revenge shaped like education. It leaves few tidy ruins. It is more like water. It moves on. There were letters, later, real ones, with stamps that survived their travel. One came on heavy paper with a crest in the corner and the distinct perfume of someone who still cordially hates herself. She wrote that she now regretted the hierarchical tendencies of my youth, in a tone that made me think of antique furniture. Another letter came on notebook paper, the lines sloping down as if they too were tired. "I am sorry. I thought if I made you small, the world would have fewer pieces. I was wrong." I answered each letter. I did not absolve. I said, "I appreciate your words. They cannot change what happened. They might change what you do next." I suggested being the adult in the room who interrupts the small cruelties. I suggested showing up at school board meetings. I suggested listening to children who hesitate. I signed my name. I licked the envelope, tasting glue, bitterness, and something else I could not name. Do you know what bullying steals most efficiently? Not dignity. It can be found later, like a lost earring under the dresser. Not confidence. It regrows, stubborn as dandelions. It steals time. Hours spent rehearsing answers in your head on the walk to school. Hours spent lying awake and rearranging your memories so they hurt less. Hours making yourself tiny or sharp or invisible. My revenge, at its narrowest, was to make time for kids who needed it, to sit with them in a room where light made soft squares on the carpet and let them talk their way out of the knot. A teacher's time is always borrowed, but I lent it anyway. Do you know the sound a knot makes when it loosens? Neither do I. But I've watched shoulders drop, watched breath return, watched a laugh arrive like a bird that has finally decided the hand is steady enough to land upon. You might ask about my own children, my own grandchildren. Did I teach them to be kind? I tried. Kindness is not a narrow, deep trait in most of us. It is a practice like scales at a piano. My daughter came home from 6th grade once with a story about a girl who smelled like smoke. She's gross, my daughter said, with the casual cruelty of the unscarred. I looked out the window at the tree that had somehow survived every storm. We do not say gross about people, I told her, and I said it again and again over the years until she began to say it to others. My grandson, taller than me by the time he could drive, confided that he had laughed at a meme about a boy in his class with an old phone. I made him write the boy a note. That's lame, he said, and I said, yes. He wrote it anyway. I do not know if it mattered, but I afforded myself the luxury of imagining a world where these small, awkward acts were seeds. And vengeance for the girl I was? I thought for a long time that the only justice would be an apology delivered in front of a crowd, one I did not have to coax, one I did not have to interpret, one that was unambiguous, loud as a bell. I did not get that. I got small things. The cashier who met my eyes when one of them pretended not to see me, as if the cashier were redistributing attention like a fair god. The student who years later became a therapist and wrote to me that she keeps a box like mine, full of notes, and passes on the practice. The boy who broke up the pack in his class by simply saying, "That's not funny," and enduring the boredom of moral courage. None of these were fireworks. Fireworks are for holidays. Ordinary justice is a porch light left on past midnight, stubborn, homely, faithful. Still, I will grant you one scene that tasted like lightning. It was at a reunion, the kind where name tags insist you reintroduce yourself to your own face. The room smelled of roses and anxiety. The punch was the color of optimism. I was there because an old friend, one who had not survived their attention but had somehow made a home in her own quiet, wanted company. My knees ached. My dress did not sit right. But I went. And there she was, the braid long gone, the upturned mouth flattened by time. She was alone, orbiting the refreshment table like a small moon. She looked at me as if I were a distant uncle who had once given her a coin. I saw the calculation, the years flipping backward like blind slats. She approached. "You look well," she said, and it was almost funny, the way language persists in its formalities even when our bodies shake with old meanings. "I look old," I said. "We both do." She laughed. Then, "Miracle of miracles," she said, "I was cruel to you. We all were. I wanted to be saying this for years, and I didn't know how to start. I am sorry." She said it aloud, with witnesses in the room. The music did not stop. No spotlight found us. A few heads turned because of her voice, which still carried. I took a breath. She had never seen me breathe like that. She had seen only the quick, frightened gulps of air I took between classroom hours. "Thank you for saying it," I replied. I carried it a long time. I will set it down now. I felt something shift. A hook came out of my back, not with the pain of pulling, but with the tender shock of release. We did not become friends. We did not exchange numbers or pretend that our lives could wrap around each other like new vines. I went home. My friend and I ate toast at my kitchen table and talked about nothing important, and I slept well, a mercy. Revenge had arrived not as a sword, but as a key, an unlocking. It had taken decades. I have made peace with the pace at which certain doors open. I wish I could teach you a spell. I wish I could hand you an amulet, inscribed on one side, "You are unbreakable," and on the other, "They are not gods." All I have is this, a life lived stubbornly in the direction of gentleness, despite all temptations. It is not glamorous, gentleness. It does not trend. But it is the only thing I have seen that can build a room where a child can set down her books without bracing for the weight of other people's hands. Sometimes, on summer evenings, when the heat makes the curtains sigh, I take the old box from the shelf and read those notes. I lay them out like tarot cards on the kitchen table and tell my fortune. It is always the same. You were here. You did not disappear. You kept something alive. I touch the paper and think of the girls who wrote the cruel notes too, their practiced folds, their sharp little pencils. Where are they now? I do not know. Sometimes I hope they found softer work for their hands. Sometimes less nobly. I hope they have days when their darlings come home from school and say, "Someone was unkind," and they feel a sting in their cheeks that is memory and shame all braided together. And then I hope they stand up, take those darlings' hands, and do not repeat what was done to them. That is the trick of it, the only alchemy I trust, to interrupt the inheritance. People think revenge must be delicious to be real. It must be eaten with a fork and gleaming teeth. My revenge tasted like porridge, like bread with jam, like the pearly cough syrup of a child's winter every day. Necessary things swallowed without drama. It tasted like the morning after the reunion, like the quiet of a classroom before the bell, like the word yes, spoken when someone wants to wriggle free. It did not make me young again. It did not return the hours, but it let me live the hours I had left without my shoulders creeping toward my ears. And one more thing, perhaps the smallest and the sharpest, I learned to laugh again. Not the polite smile I wore for decades, but the creak laugh from my girlhood, rushing over stones, unruly. It didn't come back all at once. It came like a bird, learning to trust the weather. The first time it surprised me, I put my hand to my chest as if something had flown out of it. I looked around as though someone might tell me to hush. No one did. The room was mine. The window was open. The air smelled of laundry and basil and a storm beginning far away. I laughed and it did not hurt. If there is a God of payback, I imagine she accepts offerings like that. I tell you this not because I think everyone should choose as I did. There are other kinds of justice. There are times for marching, for shouting, for naming names on a public wall. I have cheered those too, but I was a girl who learned to cry on the back stairwell, and I became a woman who learned to open doors in quiet buildings. My revenge fitted the size and shape of my life. I do not owe those girls a mythology. They were not dragons. They were weather. Weather changes. You endure. You learn the patterns. You build a roof that doesn't leak. You walk outside anyway. You raise umbrellas for children who have none. And if a storm catches you crying on the stairwell of a day, you remind yourself, this is a stairwell, not a cell. You can go up. You can go down. There are other rooms. There is a door. When I die, and I am not afraid of that anymore, I would like no mention of my pain in the notice. Only that I made good soup, that I kept a jar of pencils sharpened for visitors, that I answered letters, that I listened, that sometimes my laugh startled the housebirds, and that if you came to my door with a child whose heart ached, I made room. Those who hurt me will not be invited into that final paragraph, not because I am pretending they did not exist, but because I set them down. You can do it too. Not now, perhaps. Not yet, but someday. The box isn't only for keeping, it is also for emptying. And if you have stayed with me this whole way, past the classroom, past the stairwell, past the market and the panel, and the reunion and the kitchen table, then you have already done something difficult. You have listened to a story that offers no blaze of retribution, only a slow fire. Take a coal from it if you need one. Warm your hands. Go light whatever little lamps you can. When the pack turns its head toward you, try to meet it with a gaze that does not beg. Say your name as if it were not a question. Teach a child to interrupt. Write a note. Keep a box. Let something go. Let something grow. This is how I avenged the girl I was. I refused to become the creature they needed me to be to justify what they did. I lived out the stubborn grammar of another sentence, one that began with my name and did not end with theirs. I made my voice shake and kept speaking anyway. I turned my face toward the long road and walked it, knees aching, hands steady, laughter returning, door after door opening in quiet buildings that smelled of chalk and basil and rain. If you listen closely, even now, you can hear the creek. It runs through everything. It always did. It will not hush. In the spring after that reunion, I cleaned my cupboards and found, tucked behind a stack of mixing bowls, a small tin with a chipped lid. Inside were the hair ribbons I had saved from girlhood, not because I was sentimental then, but because I had so few of them, and losing one felt like a small catastrophe. I sat at the kitchen table and threaded the ribbons through my fingers. It surprised me that my hands remembered the pattern for braiding them. Over, under, over, and I laughed softly, a practice laugh, a warm-up for the real thing. I could feel that creek again, just under the surface of the day, running and running. I thought of the cloakroom where one of those ribbons had gone missing, and the girl who later swore she had found it on the floor and simply kept it safe. That was how the pack talked, wrapping theft in cotton, injury in the language of protection. We do this in families too, in institutions, in countries. Name the harm something else, and hope the bruise learns to answer to another word. The ribbon in my hand was faded, yes, but it was still red as the inside of a ripe apple. I tied it around a mason jar and put wildflowers in it from the market. When my granddaughter visited that weekend, she pointed to the ribbon and said, "Pretty." I told her it was old. She said, "So?" and moved on. How quickly children issue absolutions without even knowing it. That same spring, a new girl started at the school where I volunteered after I retired. I kept office hours in a corner room with 2 windows and a stubborn radiator that hissed in winter. I called it the listening room, though the sign on the door said reading lab. Names can be a kind of revenge too. Reclaim a space by calling it what you intend for it to be. The new girl, Mara, had hair that would not stay tamed in any elastic, and she laughed to herself when she read funny sentences, a habit I recognized as an early form of courage. The pack had already noticed her. They notice early. They have a taste for untidy joy. One afternoon, I saw 3 girls take positions around her at lunch, like chess pieces that know their squares by instinct. They did not touch her. They did not need to. The body learns to read intention in posture. Mara ate quickly, eyes down, then got up. Tray rattling, the milk carton collapsed, as if trying to make itself smaller. I followed her as a matter of habit, not to hover, not to witness in a way that would make her feel examined, but to make sure the hallway between the cafeteria and the bathrooms held an adult who would not look away. "Reading lab is open," I said softly when she passed, "if you want quiet." She nodded, grateful in that half-guarded way of children who have learned that gratitude can be used against them. She came. She took a book from the shelf and sat on the rug. I pretended to grade papers. After a few minutes, she said, "Do you have a box?" I looked up. "A box?" I said. "For notes," she replied, cheeks pink. "My cousin's teacher had one. You could write things you didn't know how to say out loud." "I do," I said, and I did. It was under the table next to the basket of tissues and the jar of pencils. I placed it on the carpet. "No one opens it but me, and I only read what you want me to read out loud." She wrote. The pencil moved, paused, moved again. When she folded the paper, it looked like a small bird asleep. She put it in the slot and returned to her book with the focus of someone who knows how to hide in worlds other people made. After she left, I opened the box. The note was only 3 lines long. "They are circling. It will be worse tomorrow. Please don't tell them I told." I slid the note into a folder with others like it, the stealth archive of a quiet war. Then I went to the vice principal and asked for lunch duty. "You're retired," she said, as if I were trying to commit a petty crime. "This isn't your job." "Most of my life wasn't my job," I replied. "I did it anyway." The next day, when the circling began, I stood nearby with a stack of crossword puzzles. "Help me with these," I said to the pack, the way you might say to a restless dog, "Walk?" They blinked, confused by the sudden availability of adult attention, rebranded as demand. "Come on," I added lightly. "I hear you're all very smart. Perhaps you can remember what a 6-letter word for turn back is." "Return," one said quickly, then flushed, as if she had been caught having a brain. "Rewind," another suggested, and the third, the one with lip gloss too shiny for school, murmured, "Revoke." "Retract," I offered. "Refrain." I didn't praise them. The trick is not to feed vanity, but to give competence something better to do than harm. "I need 3 more," I added, and the pack became a committee, huddled around the paper, their cruelty delayed. Delay is another form of defense. Sometimes it's all you have. Mara ate slowly, reading her book between bites, and when she left, the pack looked up as if waking from a trance. "Thanks," I said, as they drifted away disoriented. "For what?" one asked, suspicious. "For your help," I replied, and watched suspicion fight with the very human desire to be useful. "Tomorrow too?" They shrugged. The next day, they circled anyway, but less tightly. The day after that, I assigned them to help decorate the gym for an assembly, a task both stupid and holy. I put them in charge of the latter, the tallest one, the responsibility of not killing anyone by dropping it. They were good at it. Some bully girls are good at everything. It's part of what makes them dangerous. "Direct the current," my teacher's brain whispered. "Do not try to dam the river. It will only flood somewhere else." None of this made for a tidy victory, only incremental ones. Eyes lifted from trays, laughter redirected, the small relief of a lunch period spent in peace. "Is this your revenge?" a younger teacher asked me one afternoon when I showed her how to listen without rescuing. "It feels too soft." "It feels like water," I said, and she made a face as if she'd hoped for fire, something she could film and share. I wanted to tell her that even water leaves marks. Look at canyons. But I was tired, and she was new, and time would do that teaching for me. There were darker days. There always are. One of the original 4, the ones from my own school days, wrote me a long email that made me sit down slowly, as if gravity had suddenly deepened. She had a daughter, she said. The daughter had been named Queen Bee by her classmates when she was 12, and now, at 14, she was ice. I see myself in her, the mother wrote, and I hate it. She wanted advice. The temptation to write something sharp as the edge of a desk flickered in me like a bad habit. Instead, I asked for a call. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. Age does that to some people. It sands them down. She tried to apologize, and I let her words move past me without grabbing them, as if they were a river I refused to dam. Tell me about your daughter, I said, and she did. The hunger for certainty, the way she arranged her friends like furniture, the brittle grief when she was excluded from anything. She wants to be perfect, the mother whispered finally, so she makes everyone else a flaw. You know where that comes from? I said. I do, she replied, and we were quiet for a long time. What do I do? You tell her the truth, I said, that her power isn't real yet. It's borrowed from everyone who is scared of her. If she wants her own power, she'll have to build something that can stand without anyone's fear. And you, I paused, steadying my voice. You model it. You apologize well. You show her how. How? She sounded genuinely confused. Perhaps no one had ever shown her. Most packs are built by people who were never taught the steps to any other dance. Say exactly what you did, without dressing it up. Say you were wrong. Say what you will do differently. Ask what she needs that you can actually give. Don't ask to be forgiven in return. Don't center yourself. End with, thank you for listening, and leave. Will that work? So she asked, and there it was again, that hunger for a clean blade. It will be a beginning, I said. Beginnings are not nothing. The call ended. I made soup. I ate slowly. I looked at the ribbon around the jar and felt a tenderness for the girl I had been that I could not have mustered even 5 years earlier. Forgiveness, when it finally comes, is not grand. It is an everyday willingness to stop rehearsing the worst of it. I went to bed early and slept unevenly, the way old people do, in chapters. In one of those thin, wasted hours, I dreamed I was on the back stairwell again, and the wall was warm, as if the building had a heart. The next month, the school board asked me to speak at a meeting about a proposal to install more cameras in hallways. It will make students safer, a father said fiercely, brandishing statistics the way people brandish umbrellas long after the rain is gone. I stood and told them what cameras could not see. The shift of a shoulder, the ostracism that takes the form of an empty seat where it used to be full, the way a child can be hurt by silence that is technically compliant with every policy. You cannot outsource courage to a lens, I said. We need adults. We need them trained. We need them willing to say, that's not funny, without waiting for consensus. We need them to step between the pack and the soft child with their bodies if necessary, yes, but more often with their attention. Afterward, in the parking lot, a mother approached me with tears standing in her eyes like small, brave soldiers. My daughter says, you're the listening lady, she said. Thank you. Tell her she's the speaking girl, I replied. It matters what she says. I wish I could tell you that the board voted for more staff instead of more cameras. They did not. Budgets are their own kind of bully. They make you feel as if you have no choices left. The cameras went up, but we also want something we had not asked for in that meeting. Time set aside for teacher training, not the performative kind, but a series of sessions with actual practice, role-playing, scripts to use when your brain wants to freeze. The vice principal asked me to lead the first one. We sat in the library in a circle that tried to be generous. I wrote 3 sentences on the whiteboard. I saw what happened. That's not okay. Tell me what you need right now. I'm going to stay beside you while we fix this. I made them say the sentences out loud, even the ones who rolled their eyes. Words have to travel through the body to belong to you. We practiced. We failed. We practiced again. One teacher cried, another laughed, and then cried. "This feels silly," a young man said, cheeks hot. "Being decent often does," I replied. "Do it anyway." A month later, he cornered me in the hall, grinning like a boy. "I used the sentences," he said. "They worked." "They always work?" I asked, teasing. "No," he admitted, "but they worked enough." Enough is a holy word, much misunderstood. You wanted revenge. Here is a particular piece, sharp-edged and satisfying, and I will not pretend it did not sustain me. Near the end of my last year of volunteering in that building, I found a folded note on the floor of the hallway outside the science lab. The paper was thick fancy, not from a notebook. The handwriting, neat, slanted. I recognized it the way you recognize an old ache by the weather. It was the same hand that had once drawn a mouth with no tongue for me. I looked around. The hallway was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed like bored bees. I opened the note. It did not insult anyone. It was headed, "List of people we can safely ignore." Underneath, 10 names marched, tidy as a procession. Beside each name, a reason that sounded like a fact but was actually a verdict. Too intense, too shy, too much, too little. The neat hand had become an adult's hand, but the heart behind it had learned nothing. I could have taken the note to the principal. I could have photocopied it and taped it to the wall beside the mission statement. I could have burned it in a coffee can on the back steps. Instead, I did something both pettier and more exact. I wrote an 11th line. Us, when we think this way. Then I folded the note precisely along its original seams, and I put it back where I'd found it. Later that day, 2 women came down the hall, a pair from the PTA known for their efficiency and their feud. They saw the paper. One picked it up and paled. "Did you write that?" her friend hissed. "No," she shot back, the way a match flares. "Did you?" They read the 11th line. I saw something in their faces shift, not like thunder, not like a conversion, but like a window opening a finger width in a stuffy room. One said, "We have to stop." The other, after a long breath, nodded. They walked into the science lab together, not friends, not enemies. Simply 2 women who had been seen by a piece of paper in an unflattering light and had decided, for the moment, to step out of it. I went back to my listening room and made tea. Some days you take your victories like that, in sips. As for the girls from my own youth, I sometimes imagine them at their kitchen tables, the way I am now, a light bulb buzzing, a plant trying its best in a corner, a stack of bills, a pair of cheaters perched on a magazine. Do they think of me? Perhaps. Memory is a miser and a thief. It hoards and it steals unpredictably. There are mornings when I cannot recall where I put my keys, and afternoons when I remember the texture of the chalk that broke in Miss Carter's hand in 1964, the tiny gasp the room made as if the chalk had been a canary. Maybe they remember the same gasp and our eyes meeting, and maybe, for just a second, their mouths tilt downward instead of up. I tell you this too. Not every target of the pack becomes tender. Some go stone. I have seen that. I had a student once, a boy who collected humiliations the way some boys collect baseball cards, kept them in a mental binder, flipped through them in private, recited statistics. Then one day, he found he was the tallest in the room, and he did not choose gentleness. He chose to repay the debt. I called him into my room. I put 2 chairs in the center, facing each other, and I sat on one. "Sit," I said, pointing to the other. "Tell me the story of your life with you as the hero. Then tell it again, with you as the villain. Then tell it with you as a side character in someone else's story." He looked at me as if I had asked him to lift the world. He tried. The third version wrecked him. I don't know who I am there, he whispered. No one does at first, I said, and he laughed, then cried. He was not fixed that day. People are not broken plates. But he walked out different, slower at corners, less eager to cut. Years later, that boy, now a man, sent me a postcard from a city the color of rust. I try to be a side character most days, he wrote. It helps. I stuck the card on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a peach. Every time I reached for the milk, I saw it and remembered that revenge, in the end, is often about secrets you refuse to keep. The pack wants you to carry the story they wrote for you. You don't have to. Tell other stories. Teach others to tell them. That is a kind of defiance the pack cannot metabolize. What about the mother who worked nights at the bakery, you might ask? The one I tried not to trouble with my tears. She lived long enough to hear me speak at a school assembly. I was already gray. She had a coat too warm for the room. Afterward, she took my hand in both of hers and said, "You were always my brave girl." I started to protest. I had cried on stairwells. I had swallowed words. I had become small. And she squeezed my fingers so hard I thought the bones would recall their childhood names. "Bravery is not noise," she said. "Bravery is not the lack of shaking. It is shaking and doing it anyway." I put that sentence in my pocket and carried it for years, smoothing it with my thumb, the way people worry lucky stones. On the last day, I kept office hours in the listening room. I emptied the box. There were hundreds of notes, drawings of anchors and balloons, lists of names to invite and names to avoid, confessions of laughter that hurt someone whose name the writer did not know, fears of lockers and of the future and of being ordinary forever. I spread them on the rug. Sun fell across them, making squares of light that looked like small stages. I did not read every note again. It would have been like trying to re-eat a lifetime's worth of breakfasts. I made piles keep for training. For cut. Return to owners if they want them. Burn in the sink. Yes, I burned some. Fire has its place. Watching certain sentences turn to smoke did not erase the harm they had done, but it felt like instructing the air to carry less of it. I opened the window. The room smelled briefly of campfires and ghosts. Before I left that day, I wrote my own note. I folded it and put it in the empty box. I did not take it with me. I imagined a custodian finding it years later and smiling at the oddity of a blank box containing only an old lady's secret. Perhaps the custodian would open it and read, "I lived. I loved some of you. I tried. I failed. I tried again. I did not let the pack write my ending." Then perhaps the custodian would tuck it into a pocket and carry it a while. Words like that do not weigh much. That is their particular trick. Now, in the quieter years, I sit on my porch when the weather allows, and I practice saying my name aloud when no one can hear me. I do not practice for you or for them. I practice for the girl who once could not say it without asking permission. I say it the way you say the name of a country you intend to visit again, even if you will have to do it in your imagination. My knees ache. The neighbor's dog snores with commitment. The sky does what it always does, which is change while insisting it is the same. Sometimes a message arrives from a student I barely remember, because to be honest, I did not keep every face. The message will say, "You made me feel seen," or "You told me my sentence about the willow tree was stunning," or "You stood between me and a storm." I reply, I always reply. "I am glad," I write. "Keep going." I suspect this is what the revenge finally meant. To have a long enough life that the good echoed back louder than the harm. Not because the harm shrank, but because the echoes learn to find each other and harmonize. If you have been waiting for the part where I confess to some flamboyant act calling a radio station, writing a scathing letter to the editor about the hometown that let it happen, staging a public reading of that list found in the hallway, you will be disappointed again. My flamboyance is teaspoon-sized. Once, though, I did do something that made me cackle in the grocery aisle. I saw a rack of cheap, bright hair ribbons, the kind that come in packages of a dozen, each color loud as a toy. I bought 3 packs. I kept them in my bag all spring. When I saw a girl whose ponytail sagged, I offered a ribbon like an old magician pulling silk from a sleeve. "For you?" I said, as if